A few hours before my brother's wedding, I got a strange message. Don't go to the wedding. Look in your husband's garage. Period. At first, I thought it was a joke, but when I opened the garage door, I was stunned. Joan adjusted the collar on her dress and smoothed her skirt. Today was an important day. Her younger brother, Jeremy, was getting married. The whole family had been looking forward to it with joy. Jeremy was the favorite, funny, kind, the one everyone wanted to see happy. And everyone wanted him to be happy with Victoria. As his older sister, Joan felt this was a special moment. She had watched him change around Victoria, seen how his eyes lit up when he talked about her, heard the warmth in his voice when he said her name. The sun was shining through the windows. The apartment hummed with the usual wedding day chaos. Mom was baking pies in the kitchen, the sweet smell of cinnamon and apples filling the air. Dad sat at the dining table, meticulously checking the guest list for the third time. Joan was almost ready, her dress laid out on the bed, her shoes waiting by the door. Her husband, Christian, had left earlier that morning, saying he had an urgent meeting he couldn't miss. He had kissed her forehead, a quick, absent-minded peck, and said, "Don't worry, I'll be on time for the ceremony." Everything was calm, as it should be. But Joan had a strange feeling inside, a tiny knot of unease she couldn't explain. She looked in the mirror. A confident, composed woman looked back. A successful accountant with her own practice. 10 years of marriage to a good man. Everything seemed solid, unshakable. Suddenly, her phone vibrated on the nightstand. The number was unknown. She opened the message. Don't go to the wedding. Look in your husband's garage. Her heart stopped. What was this? Who sent it? Maybe a wrong number? A prank? But the anxiety grew, cold and sharp. The apartment suddenly felt empty and quiet, the cheerful noises from the kitchen muffled and distant. She read the message again, the words burning into her brain. What could possibly be in the garage? Christian never hid anything from her. Or was that just what she chose to believe? She tried calling him. The phone rang and rang, then went to voicemail. Probably still in his meeting, she told herself firmly. But inside, everything clenched. Her stomach tightened. Her palms felt clammy. She walked to the kitchen to help her mom, mechanically reaching for a mixing bowl. But her thoughts kept circling back to the message. Don't go to the wedding, look in the garage. Period. The words were stuck in her head, a splinter she couldn't remove. Joan realized she couldn't ignore it. Something was wrong. Terribly wrong. But what should she do? Drive to the garage? It seemed foolish, paranoid. Christian would be hurt, offended that she didn't trust him. But if she didn't check, she wouldn't be able to relax. The doubt would eat at her all through the ceremony, through the reception, through every smile she'd have to fake. Joan glanced at the clock. There were still a few hours until the wedding. Christian should have been back by now, or at least called. But there was nothing. No call. No message. And then Joan remembered. Christian had once mentioned, casually, that he'd made a spare key for the garage. Just in case. She tried to remember where he'd put it. And suddenly, she knew. It was in an old box of keepsakes in the closet, the one filled with letters, postcards, and souvenirs from their early years together. She opened the closet door, pulled down the box, her hands trembling. She lifted the lid, rummaged through old birthday cards and ticket stubs. And there it was. A small key. A simple piece of metal. But it could change everything. Joan hesitated. Could she really do this? Stop trusting her husband because of an anonymous text from a stranger? It felt like a betrayal in itself. But the fear, the anxiety, the gnawing curiosity were stronger than her doubt. She made a decision. I'll just look quickly. No one will know. Then I'll come back and pretend nothing happened. Quietly, moving on tiptoe. Joan slipped out of the apartment. Her parents, busy with their tasks, didn't notice a thing. Outside, the sun was bright and warm, but Joan felt no warmth. Only fear, heavy and cold in her chest. The garage wasn't far, just a few blocks away. She walked quickly, her flats clicking against the sidewalk, each step feeling like it belonged to someone else. Her thoughts were jumbled, fragments of disbelief and dread swirling together. Her heart pounded so hard she could feel it in her throat. When she arrived, she saw a long row of identical garage doors, all painted the same faded gray. She found the right one, number 47, inserted the key, heard the click, and pulled. The door creaked open on rusty hinges, revealing a darkness that seemed to swallow the afternoon light. Inside, it was cold and still. The air smelled of oil, rubber, and dust, the familiar scent of Christian's workspace. She turned on her phone's flashlight, the beam cutting through the gloom. There was Christian's car, old and dusty, parked in its usual spot. Tools hung neatly on pegboards. Boxes labeled Christmas and camping were stacked along the walls. Nothing strange. Nothing out of place. Joan breathed a sigh of relief, the tension in her shoulders loosening. Of course. It was just someone's cruel joke. Some sick prankster trying to ruin her brother's wedding day. She was already turning to leave when something in the corner caught her eye. A large box covered with an old blanket. Her feet carried her toward it before her mind could object. She didn't know why, but something about it felt wrong. The blanket was draped too carefully, as if someone had tried to hide what was beneath. She reached out, her fingers brushing against the worn fabric, and pulled it aside. Inside the box were things that shouldn't be there. A woman's handbag. Red leather, expensive. A pair of high heels, still glossy. A box of perfume, the kind that cost more than a week's groceries. Joan's heart clenched. She knew these items. She had seen Victoria carry that bag at family dinners. Had watched her slip off those shoes under the table at Thanksgiving. Had smelled that perfume every time Victoria leaned in to kiss her cheek in greeting. Joan gasped, the sound sharp and hollow in the empty garage. Her eyes blurred. Her mind refused to process what she was seeing. Why were Victoria's things in Christian's garage? It made no sense. None of it made sense. With trembling hands, she pulled out the bag. Her fingers fumbled with the clasp until it opened. Inside, a wallet, a makeup bag, keys, and a stack of photographs held together by a rubber band. Joan took them out and held them up to the light. The photos were of Christian and Victoria. They were on a beach somewhere, the sun bright behind them. Laughing, hugging, kissing. In one, he was holding her hand, their fingers intertwined. She was smiling, leaning into him with an intimacy that made Joan's stomach turn. In another, they sat at a seaside cafe, sunglasses on, drinks in front of them, looking like a couple from a vacation advertisement. Happy, carefree, in love. Joan stepped back, clutching the photos. They felt like they were burning her hands, searing the truth into her skin. The garage seemed to shrink around her, the walls closing in. The air grew heavy, thick, hard to breathe. Her legs gave way, and she stumbled against the car, gripping the hood for support. Everything came crashing down. The husband she loved. The brother she adored. The family she had worked so hard to protect. It was all a lie. A tangled, cruel, devastating lie. Still in shock, her body moving on autopilot, she reached into the bottom of the box. Her fingers brushed against something flat. A folder. She pulled it out, opened it. She didn't know if she could handle another blow, but she couldn't stop now. She had to know everything. Inside were sheets of paper, printouts, handwritten notes, excerpts of messages between Christian and Victoria. Joan read, the lines flashing before her eyes, each word a fresh wound. Baby, I'm so glad we're doing this together. Thank you for believing in me. I know it's wrong, but I can't be without you. You are my life. I'm marrying Jeremy for the future. You know it's only temporary. When I become his wife, we'll be together. You'll leave Joan and we'll be free. Joan's hands shook violently. The folder slipped from her fingers and landed on the car hood with a soft thud. Her breath hitched, came in short, ragged gasps. Victoria never loved Jeremy. She was using him to get closer to Christian, to be with Christian. And Christian, the man who had kissed her goodbye that morning, who had smiled and said he'd see her at the ceremony, had been planning this all along. Planning to leave her. Planning to be with Victoria after she married Jeremy. It was all a lie. Every kiss, every word, every year of their marriage. A lie. The first feeling was rage. Hot, blinding, burning like fire in her chest. She wanted to scream, to smash everything around her, to find them both and throw the truth in their faces. She wanted to hurt them the way they had hurt her. But she didn't scream. She didn't move. She just stood there in the dim garage, surrounded by dust and deceit, and let the rage wash over her. And then, slowly, it cooled. It hardened into something else. Something sharp and clear. Resolve. She couldn't leave it like this. She wouldn't let her brother walk into that marriage blindly, wouldn't let them break him the way they had broken her. She had to stop it. But she had to be smart. If she stormed in screaming, they would deny everything. They would find a way to twist it, to make her look crazy, jealous, bitter. No. She needed proof. She needed to be calm. She needed to think. Joan straightened up, wiped her face with the back of her hand, and reached for her phone. Joan took out her phone and started photographing everything. The shoes. The perfume. The handbag. The photos spread out on the car hood. The handwritten notes and printed messages. She did it calmly, carefully, methodically. Each click of the camera was a small act of defiance, a gathering of evidence against the life she thought she had. She needed to be smart. If Christian discovered she'd been here, he could destroy everything before she had a chance to use it. So she worked quickly but precisely, making sure every detail was captured. Then, she put each item back exactly where she had found it. The shoes aligned just so. The handbag placed at the same angle. The folder returned to the bottom of the box. She wiped down everything she had touched: the box, the car hood, the folder, erasing any sign she had ever been there. She turned off her phone's flashlight, took one last look around the garage, and stepped outside, pulling the door closed behind her. The click of the lock sounded final, like a door closing on her old life. Outside, everything felt different. The world looked the same blue sky, the same rows of garages, the same street stretching back toward home, but it felt foreign. Cold. As if she had stepped into a parallel universe where nothing was real, nothing could be trusted. On the way back to her car, her thoughts raced. What now? Two options circled in her mind: go to the wedding and pretend nothing had happened, or find Jeremy and tell him everything. She knew she couldn't speak at the wedding itself. Not in front of the guests, not amidst the laughter and music and champagne toasts. That would be cruel, public, humiliating for everyone. But she couldn't stay silent either. Not anymore. Not after what she had seen. Joan got in her car, gripped the steering wheel, and took a deep breath. Then another. Her hands were shaking. Her heart was a drum in her chest. But beneath the fear and shock, something solid had formed. Resolve. She would not let her brother walk into a lie. She would not let them destroy him. Time to act. She decided to talk to Jeremy alone. No witnesses. No drama. Just the two of them, away from everyone else. She pulled out her phone and dialed his number. The rings lasted forever. Each one stretched into an eternity. Finally, he answered. "Hey, Joni. What's up? Why aren't you here yet?" His voice was light, cheerful, full of anticipation. She could hear the smile in it. He was happy. He was excited. He had no idea what was coming. "Jeremy," Joan said, forcing her voice to stay calm. "We need to talk in person. Alone. It's important." The pause on the other end was immediate. "What's wrong? Tell me." "I can't over the phone. It's too personal. Can we meet, even for just a few minutes?" Another pause, longer this time. She could almost hear his breathing change, the happiness draining away, replaced by confusion and the first flicker of fear. "Joan, the wedding is in less than an hour." "I know, but it's about Victoria." Silence. Heavy, loaded silence. Then a quiet sigh, the sound of a man bracing himself. "Okay," he said. "Where?" "Behind the black entrance. In half an hour." "I'll be there," he said, his voice different now, quieter, strained. The line went dead. Joan leaned back in her seat, her head against the headrest. Her heart was still pounding. Her hands were ice cold. But the main thing was, she had made up her mind. She had crossed a line, and there was no going back. She wouldn't stay silent anymore. She arrived at the meeting spot in a few minutes. It was a service entrance at the back of the restaurant, away from the main parking lot, away from the arriving guests. Jeremy was already there, pacing back and forth, his dress shoes clicking against the pavement. He kept checking his watch, then looking up, then checking it again. He was in his tuxedo, immaculate, his hair perfectly styled, his boutonniere pinned to his lapel. But his movements gave him away. The pacing, the nervous glances, the way he kept running his hand through his hair, messing up the careful styling. He was tense, anxious, bracing for something he couldn't yet name. Joan parked and got out of the car. In her hands, she held an envelope. Inside, printouts and photos. The truth, captured in ink and paper. Jeremy noticed her immediately and walked over, his pace quickening with each step. "What's going on?" "Joni, you're scaring me." His eyes searched her face, looking for answers, looking for reassurance. He wouldn't find either. Joan didn't answer right away. She opened her bag, pulled out the envelope, and held it out to him. "See for yourself," she said quietly. Her voice was steady, but just barely. "You need to know the truth." Jeremy frowned, confusion and dread mixing on his face. He took the envelope, his fingers fumbling with the clasp. He pulled out the photos first and started flipping through them. At first, he smiled slightly. A confused, uncertain smile, as if he thought this might be some kind of joke. A prank. A misunderstanding. But the smile didn't last. As he moved from one photo to the next, the color drained from his face. His brow furrowed deep. His lips parted, but no sound came out. He was silent, utterly silent, as if the photos had stolen his voice. Then he reached the printed messages. He stopped. He read. Each line seemed to hit him like a physical blow. His hands began to tremble, the papers shaking in his grip. When he finally looked up at Joan, his eyes were wide with shock, hollow with disbelief. "Is this real?" he whispered. His voice cracked. "It can't be." Joan's heart broke for him. "I wish it weren't," she said softly. "But I found all of this in Christian's garage. I saw it with my own eyes. I photographed everything." He looked back at the papers, clutching them so tightly his knuckles went white. His breathing was heavy, uneven, each breath a struggle. The understanding was coming now, slowly and painfully, like poison seeping into his veins. "Why?" he whispered. The word was barely audible, more air than sound. "Why would she do this to me?" Joan stepped forward and gently placed her hand on his shoulder. She could feel him trembling beneath her touch. "I don't know," she said. "But you can't go through with this. Not with her. Not after this." He pulled away slightly, lifting his hand to cover his face, as if trying to block out the world, to stop the spinning in his head. His shoulders shook once, twice, then stilled. "The wedding is in an hour," he said, his voice muffled behind his hand. "Everyone's already here. Guests. Parents. How can I call it off now?" "You're not alone," Joan said, her voice steady despite the chaos inside her. "I'm here. I'll help you. Whatever you decide, we'll get through it together." Jeremy looked at her for a long moment, his eyes searching hers. She could see the war raging behind them, the shock, the pain, the disbelief, but then something shifted. His shoulders straightened, almost imperceptibly. His jaw tightened. He had made his choice. It was incredibly painful, she could see that, but something new appeared in his eyes. Firmness. Certainty. "Let's go," he said. They walked toward the restaurant entrance, side by side. Joan could feel the weight of the envelope, still in her bag, the evidence of betrayal, but she kept her focus on Jeremy. On his breathing. On the way he held the door for her, a small gesture of normalcy in a moment that was anything but normal. Inside, it was noisy. Music played from hidden speakers, a soft instrumental version of a love song. Conversations buzzed and hummed, guests sipping champagne and checking their watches, eager for the ceremony to begin. Elderly aunts fanned themselves. Children ran between tables. Parents smiled and posed for photos. Victoria stood by the flower-adorned arch at the far end of the room, all in white, beautiful and radiant. Her dress flowed around her like a cloud. Her hair was swept up elegantly, dotted with small white flowers. She was nervously adjusting her veil, glancing toward the door, waiting for her groom. When Jeremy approached, she turned. Her face lit up with a smile, practiced and perfect. "Jeremy, honey, where have you been?" "I was getting worried." She reached for his hand. Jeremy didn't take it. He stopped a few feet away, and in a voice that carried through the suddenly quieting room, he said, "The wedding is off." The words landed like stones in still water. Ripples of silence spread outward. Conversations died mid-sentence. Glasses paused halfway to lips. Every face in the room turned toward them. Victoria blinked, her smile freezing, then cracking. "What? What did you say?" A nervous laugh escaped her. "Is this a joke?" "Because it's not funny, Jeremy." "No," Jeremy replied, his voice calm and firm. "It's not a joke. I know everything about you and Christian. I've seen the photos. I've read the messages." For a split second, Victoria's face went completely blank. Then confusion crumpled her features. Then panic, raw, undisguised panic, flashed in her eyes. "It's not true," she said, her voice rising. "It's a lie. Who told you this? Whoever it is, they're lying. It's all made up." "It doesn't matter who," Jeremy said. "What matters is that I know the truth now. I'm not going to marry someone who lied to me. Someone who is using me." Victoria's expression shifted again. The panic hardened into something sharp and angry. "How dare you?" she spat, her voice losing all pretense of sweetness. "You're ruining everything. Do you have any idea what you're doing? All these people, our families." "Yes," Jeremy interrupted, his voice still calm, still steady. "I know exactly what I'm doing. I'm stopping something that never should have started." Victoria's gaze snapped past him, searching, and landed on Joan. Her eyes narrowed, then widened with recognition. With fury. "It was you," she hissed. "You. You've always hated me. From the very beginning, you were jealous. Jealous of me and Jeremy. Jealous of our happiness." Joan met her gaze without flinching. "Don't be ridiculous, Victoria. I wasn't jealous. I was just protecting my brother." "Protecting?" Victoria's voice climbed higher, shriller. Guests were whispering now, phones were being pulled out, cameras forgotten. "You've destroyed our lives. His life. My life." "You didn't have a life," Joan replied, her voice cool and steady. "You had a lie. And you can't build happiness on a lie." Victoria trembled, her whole body shaking with rage. Her hands balled into fists at her sides. She took a step toward Joan, then another. And then, with a wordless cry of fury, she raised her hand to strike. But Jeremy was faster. His hand shot out and grabbed her wrist mid-swing, holding it firmly. "Don't," he said, his voice low and hard. "Just leave. And don't come back." For a moment, Victoria stood frozen, her arms still raised, her mouth open, her eyes wild. She looked around the room, at the shocked faces of the guests, at her discarded bouquet on the floor, at the flowers scattered like casualties, at everything crumbling around her. Then she wrenched her wrist free, let out a scream of pure rage and anguish, and ran. She ran through the crowd, past the tables, out the main door. It slammed behind her with a crash that echoed through the silent hall. Jeremy stood still for a long moment, then slowly, as if his legs could no longer hold him, he sank into the nearest chair. He was completely tense, his shoulders slumped, his fists clenched on his knees. The silence in the hall was absolute. No one moved. No one spoke. Joan sat down in the chair beside him. She didn't touch him, didn't speak. She just sat with him, a steady presence in the wreckage. Finally, Jeremy whispered, "What now?" Joan leaned slightly toward him. "Now you just breathe," she said softly. "And then we start over." A murmur began to spread through the guests, whispers, questions, confusion, but before it could grow, a figure emerged from the crowd. Christian. He walked toward Joan, his face a mask of confusion and anxiety. "Joan," he said, his voice low, trying to sound concerned. "What's going on? Why did Jeremy call off the wedding?" Joan looked up at him. She looked straight into his eyes, the eyes of the man she had loved for 10 years, the man who had kissed her goodbye that morning, the man who had been planning to leave her for his mistress. And she felt nothing. No fear. No love. No hate. Just a cold, clear certainty. "Because he knows, Christian," she said. "He knows about you and Victoria." Christian froze. The color drained from his face. His lips parted, moved, but no sound came out. Panic flickered in his eyes, genuine, primal panic, before he caught himself. "What? What are you talking about?" he stammered, his voice too high, too fast. "That's insane. You're not making any sense." "It doesn't matter anymore," Joan replied, her voice flat. "The main thing is, it's over. He's not marrying your mistress." Christian's expression shifted. The panic hardened into something uglier. His jaw tightened. His eyes narrowed. "You told him," he hissed, the words dripping with venom. "You ruined everything." "No." Joan stood up slowly, meeting him at eye level. "I saved him. And I saved myself too. You destroyed everything the day you decided to betray us. The day you started lying. The day you put those photos in that box." Christian's face darkened further, a deep, dangerous red. He clenched his jaw so hard she could see the muscles jumping in his cheeks. "You'll regret this," he said, his voice low and shaking with barely controlled rage. "I won't forgive you for this." He didn't wait for a response. He spun on his heel and strode toward the door, pushing past confused guests, not looking back. The door slammed behind him, a second crash in a day full of them. Joan watched him go, her heart heavy. Not because she felt sorry for him, she didn't, not anymore. But because she knew him. She knew he wouldn't go quietly. Christian was the kind of man who needed to win, who needed to have the last word, who needed to make others pay for crossing him. He would want revenge. That was who he was. But Joan was no longer afraid of him. She was no longer the naive, trusting woman who had kissed him goodbye that morning. The woman who believed in forever. The woman who thought her marriage was solid. His infidelity had changed her forever. But it hadn't broken her. It had forged something new in its place. Something harder. Something stronger. She turned back to Jeremy, who was still sitting, still staring at nothing. She sat down beside him again. And together, in the silent, shattered ballroom, they began to breathe. A few days later, Christian packed his things and left. Joan stood in the bedroom doorway and watched him. He moved through their shared space like a stranger, pulling clothes from hangers, emptying drawers, zipping bags. He didn't look at her. Didn't speak. Didn't leave a note, an explanation, a goodbye. He just moved from room to room, erasing himself from their life, and then he walked out the front door without a backward glance. Joan didn't try to stop him. She didn't call his name. Didn't ask why. She simply watched the door close behind him and listened to his footsteps fade down the hallway. Then there was silence. She realized, in that moment, that their marriage was no longer worth fighting for. It had died days ago, in a dark garage, the moment she opened that box and saw a red handbag that didn't belong to her. Everything after that had just been paperwork and formalities. The apartment became quiet. Not the comfortable quiet of a peaceful home, but the heavy silence of something ended, as if a thick curtain had fallen over her life. Joan sat on the couch, alone in the living room, and for the first time since that morning, was it really only days ago, she closed her eyes and allowed herself to feel everything. The pain came first, sharp and deep. The sadness followed, a heavy weight in her chest. Then the fear of being alone, fear of the future, fear of what came next. And beneath it all, the distrust, the poison that would take time to fade. But beneath all of that, something else stirred. Small at first, then growing. A feeling of lightness. Of release. She was free. The following days passed as if in a fog. Joan moved through them mechanically, doing what needed to be done. She found a lawyer, a no-nonsense woman with steady eyes who listened without judgment. She began preparing divorce papers, gathering documents, making lists. It was tedious, exhausting work, but it kept her mind occupied. She tried to manage her emotions, but they were unruly things, surfacing at unexpected moments. A song on the radio. A familiar smell. The empty side of the closet. It was hard. So hard. But she held on. She held on for herself, and she held on for Jeremy. Jeremy was struggling too. The betrayal had wounded him deeply, carved a hole in his chest where trust used to live. But he was trying. Step by step, day by day, he was trying to move forward. In those first difficult weeks, he and Joan became each other's anchors. They talked on the phone every evening. They had dinner together several times a week. They didn't always talk about what had happened. Sometimes they just sat together, watching TV or reading in comfortable silence. But the connection was there, stronger than ever. Now, they were bound not only by family ties, but by something deeper. The pain they had endured together. The truth they had faced together. The healing they were doing together. One evening, Jeremy came over for dinner. Joan had made pasta, a simple meal, and they ate at the small kitchen table. He looked tired, there were shadows under his eyes, and his smile didn't come as easily as it once had, but there was something else there too. Life. Hope. A spark that hadn't been there before. After dinner, as they sat with cups of tea, he looked at her with an expression she couldn't quite read. "Thank you, Joni," he said suddenly, and then he was hugging her, his arms tight around her shoulders. "You saved me. I don't know what I would have done without you. If you hadn't shown me those photos, if you hadn't stopped me," he pulled back, his eyes glistening. "I would have married her. I would have spent my life with someone who was using me. And I never would have known." Joan squeezed his hand. "I'll always be here," she said softly. "We'll get through this together. All of it." "I know," he said, and this time his smile was real if small. He sat back down, wrapping his hands around his mug. "I've been thinking a lot lately. About the future. About what comes next." He paused, as if gathering courage. "I want to start something new. Maybe open my own business. A photography studio. It's been in my head for a while, this idea. And I think I'm ready. Ready to try." Joan's face lit up. "That's wonderful, Jeremy. Really. You're so talented. Your photos have always been beautiful." She reached across the table and squeezed his hand again. "I believe in you. You'll succeed. I know you will." They sat together for a long time after that, talking about the future. Jeremy's studio. Joan's plans for her new life. The places they wanted to travel. The things they wanted to learn. They remembered the past too, not the painful parts, but the good parts. Childhood memories. Family vacations. Inside jokes that still made them laugh. They dreamed together, two wounded people finding their way back to hope. Yes, they were wounded. But they were not broken. In their shared pain, they had found strength. In each other, they had found support. And that, Joan realized, was something Christian and Victoria could never take from them. The divorce, when it came, went surprisingly smoothly. There was no prenuptial agreement, and for once, that worked in Joan's favor. Everything was split evenly: the apartment, the car, the joint accounts, the furniture. Christian didn't argue. He didn't contest anything. He signed the papers without comment, without even looking at her. It seemed he just wanted to forget. To erase this chapter of his life and move on. Joan didn't feel like a winner. There was no victory here, no satisfaction. But she felt relief. Deep, genuine relief. As if a long and terrible nightmare was finally, blessedly ending. She decided to keep the apartment. It was hers now, hers alone. But she also decided to make it hers in truth. She repainted the walls, getting rid of the colors Christian had chosen. She bought new curtains, new bedding, new towels. She rearranged the furniture, creating spaces that felt like her. Slowly, painfully, she was reclaiming her life. One evening, while sorting through old boxes in the garage before a trip to the donation center, her phone rang. The screen showed an unknown number. At first, she thought about not answering. She was tired, emotionally drained, and not in the mood for telemarketers or wrong numbers. But something made her pick up. "Hello. Hello, Joan. This is Keith." The voice was unfamiliar, hesitant. The name tugged at her memory, but wouldn't quite surface. Keith? I'm sorry, I don't remember right away. I used to work with Christian, he said gently. There was a kindness in his voice, a softness that made her pause. You came to the office a couple of times. A few years ago. I don't think you'd remember me. I was always in the background. And then she did remember. Keith. Quiet, unassuming Keith, who kept to himself, who always seemed to be working at his desk when everyone else was socializing. She had barely exchanged more than a few words with him over the years. A nod in the hallway. A brief introduction at a company party. Yes, she said slowly, cautiously. I remember now. Keith. What's wrong? Why are you calling? There was a long pause on the other end. She could hear him breathing, could sense him gathering himself. I thought you should know, he said finally. I'm the one who sent you that message. The anonymous text. Before Jeremy's wedding. Joan froze. The box in her hands slipped, landing on the garage floor with a soft thud. That was you, she whispered. Her heart had stopped, then started again, pounding. Yes. But why? The question came out before she could stop it. Why would you do that? You didn't even know me. Another pause. When Keith spoke again, his voice was warm and there was something else beneath it. Pain, maybe. Understanding. Because Victoria tried to do the same thing to me. With Christian. The words hung in the air between them, heavy with meaning. She played with me. Manipulated me. Made me think there was something between us. And then she dropped me. Used me and dropped me. I think she wanted something, a promotion. Access to information, power. I'm not entirely sure what her endgame was. He paused, took a breath. But when I found out about her and Christian, and what they were planning to do to your brother, I couldn't stay silent. I had to do something. But I was scared. Scared no one would believe me. Scared of what Christian might do if he found out. That's why I stayed anonymous. I'm sorry. I should have told you sooner. I should have. Keith. Joan's voice cut through his rambling, soft but firm. Stop. You have nothing to apologize for. You saved me. You saved Jeremy. You gave us the truth when no one else would. Silence on the other end. Then, quietly, I just wanted you to know. You deserve to know who sent it. And you deserve to know you weren't alone. Someone else saw what they were doing. Someone else cared. Joan leaned against the garage wall, her eyes stinging. Thank you, she said. Thank you for having the courage to do what you did. Even anonymously. Even scared. You made a difference. You changed everything. They talked for a few more minutes, awkwardly at first, then more easily. Keith told her a little about himself, that he had left the company, that he was doing better now, that he had thought about reaching out 100 times, but never found the courage. Joan told him that she was okay, that Jeremy was okay, that the truth had set them both free. When the call ended, Joan stood in the garage for a long time, the phone still in her hand. The boxes around her, the remnants of her old life, seemed less important now. Someone had been watching. Someone had cared enough to act. She wasn't alone. She had never been alone. For the first time in weeks, she smiled. A real smile. That night, lying in bed in the apartment that still smelled faintly of Christian's cologne, something shifted inside Joan. She stared at the ceiling, watching the play of streetlights across the plaster, and felt a decision forming. A resolve. She no longer wanted to live in the past. Enough of the fear, the pain, the constant replaying of betrayal. She was tired of standing still, of waiting for the next blow, of letting what had happened define her. It was time to move forward. Time to choose her own direction. She made a decision. Over the following weeks, Joan put that decision into action. She sold her share of the apartment she had shared with Christian, the apartment filled with memories that were now tainted, and bought a new place. Smaller, yes, but hers. It was in another part of the city, a neighborhood she had always liked but never lived in. There were no old shadows here. No ghosts lurking in corners. Just empty rooms waiting to be filled with her life. She left her job. The accounting firm where she had worked for over 10 years, the stable, respectable career she had built from the ground up. She walked away from it all. It wasn't an easy decision. That job had been her security, her identity, her proof that she was capable and successful. But now, when she sat at her desk, she felt nothing. No passion. No satisfaction. Just the hollow echo of work that no longer meant anything. Instead, Joan found something new. A smaller company, more creative, more dynamic. They needed someone with her skills, but they also valued something she had forgotten she possessed: imagination. For the first time in a long while, Joan felt the world was open to her, full of possibilities she had never allowed herself to see. Jeremy started to recover too. Slowly, painfully, but surely. He found a new job, nothing extraordinary, just something to pay the bills, but more importantly, he picked up photography again. It was a hobby he had loved since his youth, something he had abandoned somewhere along the way to adulthood. Now he rediscovered it, and it became his lifeline. He started traveling on weekends. Nothing far, nearby towns, state parks, places within driving distance. He would call Joan from the road, his voice alive with excitement, telling her about the sunsets he had captured, the people he had met, the feeling of freedom that was slowly returning after months of silence. He sent her photos: golden fields at dusk, misty mornings over lakes, strangers smiling in marketplaces. Each image was a small declaration: I am still here. I am still living. These conversations only strengthened their bond. They had always been close, brother and sister, connected by blood and shared history, but now there was something else between them. Something solid. Something real. They had walked through fire together and come out the other side. They understood each other in ways no one else could. One afternoon, as Joan was walking home from the grocery store, a bag of produce in each arm, she turned a corner and almost collided with someone coming the other way. She looked up, an apology already forming on her lips, and froze. It was Christian. He looked older, tired, thinner than she remembered, as if the past months had eaten away at him. Wrinkles had appeared around his mouth, deepening the lines of his face. And in his eyes, something she had never seen there before. Something that looked almost like regret. Seeing her, he stopped dead. For a moment, he seemed to consider turning away, pretending he hadn't noticed her. His gaze dropped to the sidewalk, as if hoping she would just walk past. But Joan didn't walk past. She stood still, the grocery bags hanging at her sides, and looked at him. Christian, she said calmly. Not accusing. Not angry. Just a statement of fact. He froze. Then, slowly, he raised his eyes to meet hers. And on his face, she saw it clearly: shame. Maybe even sadness. The mask he had worn for so long was gone, and underneath was just a man. A flawed, broken man who had made terrible choices. Joan. His voice was hoarse, uncertain. He stopped, swallowed, started again. I've wanted to tell you something for a long time. I didn't know if I'd ever get the chance. She waited. No anger. No fear. Just patience. I'm sorry, he whispered. The words hung in the air between them, fragile and inadequate. For everything. For the lies. For the betrayal. For hurting you. His voice cracked. For all of it. Joan didn't answer right away. Silence stretched between them, filled with the distant sounds of traffic, of children playing somewhere down the street. She looked at this man she had once loved, once trusted, once built a life with. And she thought about everything he had taken from her. Her trust. Her peace of mind. Her belief in the solidity of love. But she also thought about what she had gained. Her freedom. Her strength. A deeper connection with her brother. The courage of a stranger named Keith. The knowledge that she could survive anything. When she finally spoke, her voice was steady and calm. I forgive you. Christian's eyes widened. Surprise, disbelief, hope, they flickered across his face in rapid succession. Really? The word was barely audible. I'm doing this for me, Joan said. Not for you. I don't want to carry this inside me anymore. The anger, the hurt, the constant replaying of what happened. It's too heavy. I don't want to hate you. I don't want to hate anyone. I want to move on. He nodded slowly. His lips trembled, and for a moment she thought he might cry. But he held himself together, just barely. "I hope you find your happiness, Joan," he said. His voice was thick with emotion. "Real happiness. You deserve it." "I will," she said. And she meant it. "I hope you find yours too." She didn't wait for a response. She turned and continued walking, her pace steady, her head held high. The grocery bags swung at her sides, ordinary and grounding. Behind her, she heard him stand still for a long moment, then finally walk away in the opposite direction. Not with anger, not with sadness, but with a sense of peace that settled over her like a warm blanket. She was free, truly free, and she was ready for whatever came next. In the following days, life became peaceful. But it was a new kind of peace, not the soft, comfortable peace of a life without hardship, but something harder one. It was the peace that came from strength, from surviving, from walking through fire and emerging on the other side. Still standing. Joan had been through a lot. More than she had ever imagined she could endure. And it had changed her, yes, but not in the way she once feared. It hadn't broken her. It had made her stronger. Now, finally, she knew who she was. Not the wife of Christian. Not the successful accountant with the perfect marriage. Just Joan. Herself. The betrayal, she realized, had not been an ending. It had been a beginning. A painful, devastating beginning, but a beginning nonetheless. It had forced her to see everything differently, her dreams, her desires, the person she had become, and the person she still wanted to be. It had stripped away the illusions she had wrapped herself in and left her with something raw and real. She no longer doubted herself. The voice inside her head that used to whisper, "What if you're wrong? What if it's your fault?" had grown quiet. She didn't cling to things that were no longer needed, old resentments, old fears, old versions of herself that no longer fit. She valued the truth now, even when it was painful. And most of all, she valued herself. She was no longer afraid to change, to grow, to become someone new. There were still difficult days. Of course there were. Moments when the past would reach out and tug at her hand like a persistent ghost, a memory, a smell, a song on the radio that transported her back to a time before everything fell apart. But now Joan knew how to handle those moments. She would acknowledge them, feel them, and then let them pass. She had the strength to do that now. She had people too. Jeremy, of course, her anchor, her partner in healing. Keith, the quiet stranger whose courage had changed everything. And new friends she was slowly making. A woman from her new job who shared her love of bad movies, a neighbor who always waved hello, a barista who remembered her order and asked about her day. Small connections, but they mattered. They reminded her that the world was full of good people. She had a new life. And it was waiting for her. One morning, Joan stood at the window of her new apartment, a cup of coffee warming her hands. The sun streamed through the glass, gentle and golden, painting the walls in soft light. She looked around the room, at the furniture she had chosen, the books she had arranged, the plants she was learning to keep alive, and felt something she hadn't felt in a long time. Contentment. No voices from the past. No regrets whispering in her ear. Only silence. And in that silence, she smiled. Spring came quietly that year. The city, which had seemed gray and cold for so long, appeared to breathe anew. Trees that had stood bare for months suddenly burst into tender green. Flowers pushed up through the soil in window boxes and public gardens. The air warmed and softened, filled with the scent of new beginnings. Joan found herself drawn outside more often. She started taking long walks through neighborhoods she had never explored, discovering hidden parks and quiet streets. She browsed bookstores, letting her fingers trail along spines, picking up volumes she would never have noticed before. She listened to music she hadn't played in years, old favorites from college, albums her younger self had loved, and rediscovered parts of herself that had been forgotten. She bought a new notebook, its pages blank and full of possibility. And she started writing again. Not for anyone else, just for herself. Thoughts that drifted through her mind. Feelings she couldn't quite name. Memories that surfaced and demanded attention. pieces of herself, scattered and fragmented, slowly coming back together. One Saturday morning, her phone buzzed with a message from Jeremy. "Want to go for a hike? Found a trail outside the city. Beautiful place." Joan smiled at the screen. "I'm in," she replied. They drove out of the city together, Jeremy at the wheel, the windows down, music playing softly on the radio. The landscape changed gradually, buildings giving way to trees, pavement giving way to dirt roads. By the time they parked at the trailhead, they were surrounded by green hills and the sound of birds. They spent the day walking. The trail wound through meadows filled with wildflowers, purple and yellow and white, swaying in the breeze. They climbed gently uphill, stopping occasionally to catch their breath and take in the view. They talked about important things: Jeremy's photography business, which was slowly taking shape, Joan's new job, which challenged her in ways she appreciated, their parents, who were finally starting to recover from the shock of the canceled wedding. And they talked about nothing at all. Silly stories from their childhood. Arguments about the best pizza topping. Jeremy's terrible attempts at cooking. Laughter that came easily and often. At one point, as they rested on a large, flat rock overlooking a valley, Jeremy turned to Joan with his camera in his lap. He studied her for a moment, his head tilted. "You seem lighter," he said. "Like you've let go of something heavy you were carrying." Joan considered this. She thought about the weight she had carried, the suspicion, the fear, the rage, the grief. All of it piled on her shoulders for months. And she realized he was right. It was gone. Or at least, it no longer weighed her down. "Yes," she said softly. "For the first time in a long time, I feel like I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be." Above them, the sky stretched endless and blue. A warm breeze, calm and gentle, ruffled their hair. Jeremy lifted his camera and snapped a photo of her without asking, a candid moment, her face turned toward the horizon, a small smile on her lips. "Do you ever think about her?" he asked quietly, lowering the camera. "About Victoria?" Joan nodded. "Sometimes. But not with anger anymore. Just as a lesson." She paused, gathering her thoughts. A lesson that people aren't always what they seem. That you have to trust your intuition, even when it's telling you something you don't want to hear. And that even deep betrayal, the worst kind, doesn't define who you are. It just shows you who they are. Jeremy was silent for a moment, processing her words. Then he nodded slowly. "I needed to hear that," he said. "Thank you." They sat together in comfortable silence, watching the light shift across the valley until the sun began its slow descent toward the horizon. Later that evening, after Jeremy had dropped her home and driven away with a wave, Joan stood in her apartment for a long time. The soft light of sunset poured through the windows, painting the walls in shades of orange and pink. She moved from room to room, trailing her fingers over surfaces, feeling the quiet settle around her. The scars inside her remained. She knew they always would. But they no longer hurt. They were no longer open wounds, raw and bleeding. They had healed into something else, marks, reminders of what she had survived. Evidence of her strength. And then, a quiet knock at the door. Joan frowned. She wasn't expecting anyone. Jeremy had just left. Her new friends didn't know her address yet. She approached the door slowly, peering through the peephole. The hallway was empty. She opened the door and looked down. On the mat lay an envelope. Plain white. No name. No return address. Curious, she bent and picked it up. It was light, containing only one thing. She opened it carefully and slid the contents into her hand. A photograph. It was old, slightly faded at the edges. She recognized the scene immediately, a family barbecue in her parents' backyard, years and years ago. She and Jeremy were in the center of the frame, laughing at something off camera. She was maybe 16, her hair in a ponytail, her face sun-kissed and carefree. Jeremy was younger, 12 or 13, grinning with a gap where he'd lost a tooth. Behind them, the grill sent up wisps of smoke. Everyone looked happy, innocent, unburdened. She turned the photo over. On the back, in neat, unfamiliar handwriting, was a single line. "Some truths are worth fighting for." Joan's breath caught. A lump formed in her throat. She knew who it was from. She hadn't heard from Keith since their phone call weeks ago. She didn't know where he lived now, what he was doing, whether he had found his own peace. But this small gesture, this reminder that someone had seen, had cared, had acted, meant more than words could express. She held the photo for a long moment, her eyes stinging. Then she walked to her bookshelf, found an empty frame among the boxes she still hadn't fully unpacked, and placed the photograph inside. She set it on the shelf where she would see it every day. A reminder of where she had come from, of who she had been, and of the truth, painful, beautiful, liberating, that had set her free. In the following weeks, Joan started saying yes to new things. It began small. A coworker invited her to join a book club, and instead of making an excuse about being busy or tired, she said yes. Thursday evenings found her in a cozy corner of a local bookstore, surrounded by strangers who slowly became familiar, discussing novels she would never have picked up on her own. She didn't always love the books, but she loved the conversations. The way people saw different things in the same pages. The laughter that erupted over wine and snacks. The feeling of being part of something again. On weekends, she tried something bolder. A painting class. She hadn't held a brush since high school art, and her first attempts were clumsy landscapes that looked nothing like landscapes, colors that clashed in ways she hadn't intended. But the teacher was patient, and the other students were kind, and slowly, she stopped caring about being good. She started caring about the process. About the feel of paint on canvas. About creating something, anything, with her own hands. She met new people there. A retired nurse who painted vibrant abstracts. A young man who used art to manage his anxiety. A woman roughly her age who had also been through a divorce and understood, without words, some of what Joan carried. They would go for coffee after class sometimes, these new connections, and Joan found herself opening up in ways she hadn't expected. Sharing stories. Listening to theirs. Building the kind of friendships that felt real and unforced. She even went on a date. Just one. A man from the book club who had asked her out with a nervous smile. He was nice, genuinely nice, not the performative kind she had learned to recognize. They had dinner at a small Italian restaurant, talked about books and travel and their families, and parted with a friendly hug and no expectations. It didn't go anywhere, and that was fine. What mattered was that she had been open to it. Open to the possibility. Open to the world again. Open to herself. The past remained, of course. It always would. Those years with Christian, the betrayal, the garage, the wedding, the healing, they were all part of her now, woven into the fabric of who she had become. But they no longer held her. They no longer dictated her moods or colored her days. They were simply there. Memories. Lessons. Scars that had healed. She thought about Victoria sometimes, but only briefly. She heard through mutual acquaintances that Victoria had left the city, moved somewhere far away to start over. Joan wished her well, genuinely. Not because Victoria deserved it, but because holding on to anger would only hurt herself. She thought about Christian too, occasionally. She hoped he had found whatever he was looking for, even if it hadn't been with her. And she thought about Keith, the quiet man who had changed everything. She never saw him, never heard from him again after that photograph arrived. But she kept the photo on her bookshelf, a daily reminder that courage could come from unexpected places. That one person, even a stranger, could make a difference. That some truths were, indeed, worth fighting for. One night, Joan lay in bed, listening to the familiar sounds of the city outside her window. Sirens in the distance. The rumble of a late-night bus. Laughter from the street below, someone walking home from a party. Ordinary sounds. Life sounds. She stared at the ceiling, feeling the weight of the blankets, the softness of the pillow beneath her head. And she thought about everything that had brought her here. The message. The garage. The photographs. The confrontation. The divorce. The long, painful process of putting herself back together. She had done it. All of it. She had faced the worst and survived. She had let herself feel the pain and then let it go. She had opened herself to new things, new people, new possibilities. She had built a life that was truly hers. In the darkness, she whispered to herself. Just 4 words, quiet and honest. I made it. It wasn't a grand declaration. There were no fireworks, no dramatic music, no audience to witness it. Just Joan, alone in her apartment, speaking the truth into the night. But those 4 words carried everything. The fear she had conquered. The strength she had found. The person she had become. She had gone through it all. She had faced the truth, no matter how painful. She had risen up from the ashes of her old life. And now, finally, truly, she was free. Joan closed her eyes, a small smile on her lips, and let the sounds of the city carry her into sleep.